Uber, who has long, kind of pushed this concept of like, hey, we don't want to be a part of servicing. We'll have minority stakes. We'll partner. We don't want to, like, they said they're not going to own cars long term. I get that they're buying some near term, but now there's a report out of Bloomberg that they're going to spend $100 million building fast charging autonomous vehicle charging stations. What do you make of this? By the way, this is San Fran, Los Angeles, and Dallas. Three markets, obviously, there where autonomy is important.
Build and own. You listen to the past couple earnings calls from Uber. We want to be an asset-light company. The last quarterly call, we want to be an asset-light company. How are you going to be an asset-light company if you're owning assets? We have the SEC filing that Uber is going to own 20,000 plus Neuro, Lucid, robotaxis. Now you're going to spend $100 million on infrastructure. I'm going to pull an M&M on you. Will the real Slim Shady please stand up? Please stand up. Will the real Uber please stand up? It seems to me that Uber is trying to figure out who they want to be. And not to mention, Walt, I thought they had partners, Waymo and Moove, they've invested in, and they're on their cap table that was supposed to handle all of this.
Moove and Waymo are the high profile one. There's other ones that are kind of under the radar that Uber has made investments in and funded in order for fleets or infrastructure to be built. Those companies, they take some of this money and then they go out and try and raise additional money. So imagine you're one of those companies trying to raise additional money to build out, again, charging and service, whatever. And the guy that's about to write you a check is like, well, wait a minute, are they building their own now? And I think it potentially creates some unnecessary questions at a time when maybe some of these companies are trying to raise some money.
It raises a lot of questions. And the question is, does Uber want to compete or do they want to invest? And the inspector hat's on here because in the Q4 supplement that Uber filed, on the last page, page 13 of the slide deck, we noticed something, Walt. For the fleet partners, Moove.io was not listed there, even though Uber is very publicly on their cap table and they have given multiple press releases and spoken multiple times publicly about it. Moove was not there, and you might wonder, is Moove out of the fleet business? No. They're very publicly Waymo's partner Miami, as you saw from the video I just put out. So it seems that there's a lot of moving pieces going on behind the scenes here.
So they're Waymo's partner in Miami. They're not necessarily Uber's partner in Miami, right? Therein lies the difference. And I just want to highlight a sentence from this report from Bloomberg that was, talking about this $100 million investment in power. It said the Uber spokesperson, declined to comment on whether Waymo may use the new chargers it plans to build in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and Dallas. They're talking about Uber here, right? The Uber's chargers. Saying those sites are designed for cars that are on the Uber network.
Boom. The whole narrative that I said, and I stick by that a divorce is on the horizon, there's another very public point that points to a deteriorating relationship.